friends and colleagues. You know, there's been a lot of discussion lately about confidentiality and about the role of interpreters in social media. There's been a lot of really useful and interesting discussions, and a lot of value has come out of them. But I wanted to add my 2 cents to this dilemma or to this debate. I think there's a couple of things that are very, very important. Number one, we have to understand who holds the right of confidentiality. Who holds that right or that privilege of confidentiality? Well, that is your client. We have to be confidential and we cannot reveal what we are doing, not because of us, but because the client is the one that holds that right, and only the client can decide what happens to that right. It's just like attorneys. What does this mean? That for this reason, it is up to the client to decide when we can divulge and when we cannot divulge information about a certain event or assignment. In other words, if we plan on talking about a certain event and we plan on posting certain comments or photographs on social media, the first thing we need to do is we need to talk to the client. And if after talking to the client consents, then we should be able to post information. We should be able to post images on social media. Now, we gotta be very careful because usually what we should ask the client is whether or not they consent that we post certain things on social media. Usually these things should not include names of people or involve intellectual property that is being discussed or shown on the screen that belongs to somebody else and not to the person that is doing the event. That's just to be on the safe side. But in general, if the client consents, there is no legal obligation to secrecy anymore. So that's number one. Number two, my friends, we should also use common sense. If the client says, yes, you can take pictures, let's say, of the audience during a conference, make sure that the pictures you take are the pictures that show the back of the heads of people, unless you get the written and express consent of some of these people, or all of these people, I should say, who you will be depicting on the picture. There's a lot of times where conferences make people sign a release saying that there will be some filming and some recording, and by attending the event, people are consenting to be shown on certain images. If that is the case, and if you got the consent from the client, I think you're on safe grounds to show that on your social media. And that takes me to the second point. The second point is about what should happen as far as what we as interpreters should publish and what we should not post on social media. First of all, I have to say that there's not simple black or white answer because there's a lot of things that have to be taken into account. First one is the culture and the nation where the interpreter is working, where the intended audience is for that post. For example, there are certain things that are permissible and even expected in some countries that are unthinkable in others. As an attorney, I can give you an example. In countries like Mexico, for example, attorneys do not advertise on TV. They do not run any kind of advertisement campaigns. People know about attorneys from word of mouth or maybe consulting the Bar Association or in the old days the phone book and now by visiting the internet and doing a web search. In other countries like the United States, it's very common and is expected that attorneys advertise their services. So you constantly see attorneys' TV commercials all the time. You see attorneys on street signs. You see attorneys' advertisement on the sides and the back of buses and in the subway, because that's how it's accepted that attorneys work in the United States. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing unethical about that. It's well regulated. So something that would be unthinkable in one country might be what is expected in the other. If an attorney, let's say a personal injury attorney in the United States decides not to advertise, he might miss a lot of clientele. On the other hand, if that attorney is working in Mexico, he knows that he does not need to follow that practice. And I think the same thing should apply for interpreters. There are countries where it's expected that people use social media to advertise and other countries where it is unthinkable. Usually, the more liberal interpretation happens in the United States and other countries in the Americas, while the countries in Europe tend to be a little bit stricter along these norms. And for that reason, we should respect and take into account the place where we are operating, where we are posting, or where our intended audience is. Also, we should consider the personality of the interpreter and what the purpose of the posting is. If an interpreter is the kind of interpreter that bases a lot of what they do on their lifestyle, on the clothes they wear, on the type of assignments that they do or who they hang out with, I don't see any problem provided that they got consent from the client if the interpreter continues to post this on social media. That is up to the personality of that interpreter. There's people who are just not like that and they don't do it, and that is fine. But the fact that I don't like to post on social media shouldn't be the norm, and I should not be able to criticize somebody that does. Everybody knows their market and everybody knows who their target audience is. My target audience could be new interpreters for training, it could be new clients, maybe in show business or in the advertisement business or in some other field where advertisement is very important. Sometimes the client themselves require us to advertise or they ask us to advertise. If you work with TV stations or if you work in show business, it is very important for you to comply with social media as they ask you. They ask you to post things, to comment, to upload pictures and videos. There's nothing wrong with these interpreters doing that, and in fact, if you refuse to do it, you might not be working there for long with that kind of a client. On the other hand, it depends on the nature of the business. I never heard of any court interpreter or any diplomatic interpreter who starts posting on social media what is happening during the client-attorney privilege or during some diplomatic classified information. That's just not the case. Those interpreters don't post that. I don't think there's any problem with you posting, for example, that you were in court on such a date in such a case. That's public record. Anybody has a right to know that. If you are interpreting for a public meeting or something that is being shown on TV, there's nothing wrong with saying that you were there. That is public record. Everybody knows about that. So I don't see any problem if an interpreter, even if they didn't get consent from their client to talk or show anything that happens during the assignment, says that he or she is traveling to such and such place, or that right now he is having dinner in a restaurant in such a city. That has nothing to do with the event, and there's nothing unethical when you do that. It's not like we are working all the time for the CIA or the KGB and we have to be thinking that, oh, this is confidential information. Most of the work we do is not confidential. Most of the work we do, once that you talk to the client, they are perfectly agreeable. If you, of course, like I said, respecting intellectual property and that kind of thing, you talk about it. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you get the authorization, meaning the consent from the holder of that right. So it is important for us to understand this. It is important for us to understand that not all social media is the same. There are certain things that you can do and you are expected to do in some social media, and there's nothing wrong with that. LinkedIn is a professional social media outlet. There are other things that if your target is young people, you should do in other social media, for example, Instagram. So if all we do is use Facebook to check on our children or to see what's going on in something that we are fond of, and that's all we use social media for, then we should be very careful before we pass judgment and we start saying, oh, people shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that, because we simply do not know enough about social media. And again, we should never lose perspective that the client holds that right, that privilege, and we cannot go beyond that. If the client says, go ahead, do it, it's up to you if you want to do it or not. Might it work in some markets? Maybe. Might it backfire in others? Perhaps. But that's up to you to decide, and it's not a violation of any ethical rules, and I don't see any problem with that, because social media, interpreters, and this secrecy of confidentiality are never a black or white question. There's a lot of gray areas that change throughout the world, throughout cultures, and throughout the different fields that we practice. At least that is my opinion. Thank you very much.